Hey there guys, my name is Jason, I'm from Freelance Sound Labs, and today what I'm going to try and show you is how to get some control functionality out of the Komplete Kontrol keyboard for Ableton Live, what we call the blue hand control. Now this will help you to use the Komplete Kontrol keyboard a lot more extensively in live. This isn't explained in any of the documentation from Native Instruments. And again, this is not a perfect solution. It pretty much requires you to have a spare controller slot to be able to put an additional controller script into. I personally believe that if Native Instruments spend a bit more time developing the script that they supply for the keyboard, it could do all of this in a single script. And I would really love if someone knows how to do that, if someone knows some Python scripting to be able to put this in. But for now, users who just want to be able to control some of the macro features of live, even the I'll even show you how to control the individual track volume, all of that type of stuff. This just adds that extra layer of control. So I'll run through that in a minute, how to set all of that up. But first of all, I'll run through how to actually use Komplete Kontrol with live in its default state. So I've been around on the forums for quite some time. I've been reading a lot of things, especially users that are new to the platform, getting confused with trying to get things up and running in live. There is documentation available from Native Instruments, but it does tend to gloss over the fact that it is very important to use the included instrument rack to load an instance of Komplete Kontrol rather than just loading in the VST on its own. And there's a particular reason for that, which I'll actually show you. They probably need to point this out in a little more detail. So first of all, let's look at how it actually works. So what I've got is Komplete Kontrol loaded on 3 different tracks, but I've done it in 2 different ways. So track 1 and track 2, you'll see that I've got a nice instrument rack here. That this is the one that I use as my default. But the important thing is I've actually customized this instrument rack using the instrument rack that Native Instruments provides. Now, the big important thing that the instrument rack contains is this little control here. So when you load in the instrument rack, you open up this little triangle and you'll see that this little control is actually already learned. Now, if I go from this track to track number 2, you'll see that that number changes. Now what this little control is for is to basically tell the Komplete Kontrol keyboard what instance of the Komplete Kontrol software you want to control. So if I reach over to my controller and use the track select buttons, you'll see that the instance switches automatically. Now this is based on the the track arm button. So if I arm this track, it switches automatically for me, but if I just select the track with my mouse, it doesn't arm. What I basically have to do is select the arm button and then instantly it tells it. So this is instance 1, this was instance 2. So that's how Komplete Kontrol actually, and this requires obviously in the options, preferences, in the MIDI preferences, and this is what's explained from Native Instruments, you have to have the Komplete Kontrol control surface selected, and then in here you need to make sure that you select the Komplete Kontrol DAW input. So this one here is your MIDI input from the keyboard. This is the external MIDI input to the keyboard, and this is a third layer, which is the DAW control. This applies to the transport buttons and to the track navigation buttons. So that needs to be selected for the input and the output. And this gives us the automatic track switching. Now in this track here, I've also got an instance of Komplete Kontrol, but I've loaded this directly from the VST plugin, and you'll notice that that little control is not mapped in there. So what happens here is if I use my track control buttons, I've selected track 1, yes, that's enabled. Track 2, that's enabled. But now if I select track 3, it doesn't enable this track. I can manually do it. Click the control there, and I can control it from the keyboard now. No problem. But as soon as I move away and move back, it will not automatically select itself. And you can actually see here, it's starting to get confused now, going back to these other instances. That's because this doesn't have it. Every instance that you have, unless you want these types of anomalies to occur, you really need to make sure that you have this control here mapped. And you can't manually map that either. I don't know where it reads it from, but you've got to load it in from start. So what we'll do is get rid of this track because it's causing me issues now. For those that are having issues getting track selection to work correctly, that is probably the reason why. So every instance has to have that little control. Okay, so to move forward from that, what we want to do is get more functionality out of this keyboard. So as you're aware, when you load the a VST into the Komplete Kontrol software here, when we're selected by MIDI mode here, all of the controls that are mapped in the software, so if I open up this, all of these controls that we've learned in the software will now appear conveniently on the keyboard's LCD scribble strip. Now this is really handy because if I switch between this instance here and go back and switch to this instance here, all of a sudden all these controls appear on my keyboard now. So whatever track I've got selected, it shows me what I'm controlling straight out. It's really, really good. Where this falls down when you're using it in a DAW, like we are here in live, is let's say I grab, I'm just going to go into my user library to the VST preset packs that I've created here. So if I go down to Omnisphere and just drag in a Omnisphere preset. So basically this could be a live instrument or any instrument we're not wrapping in this Komplete Kontrol container. So here we go, we've opened up this this ARP preset. If I play this, very nice, as most Omnispheres are. Now I've already created a template preset for this, and you'll notice that when I open up this instrument, so I've loaded this instrument in, it has all of these controls mapped automatically. I cannot access any of these from my Komplete Kontrol hardware. Just can't do it. Because Komplete Kontrol does not have direct access to these. What I can do is I can activate MIDI mode, and I can click on a control and I can go to my keyboard and twist a knob and learn it to that, but it will be hard coded to that, which means that if I move to another track, I can still control the previous track and I may not want to. One of the nice things about Ableton Live is we've got this little blue hand, which is automation control from your controllers. As you move from one track to another, the controls on your interface will now apply to the selected track, which is what makes programming automation and things like that so much quicker and easier. I want the same thing for my Komplete Kontrol keyboard, but Native Instruments doesn't give that to us. So what we're going to do is design it ourselves. And we're going to do that by first opening up the Native Instruments control editor. So one thing to point out with the Komplete Kontrol keyboard is there's two modes that it operates in. There's what's called the Native Instruments Komplete Kontrol mode. Now that is evident by the fact that the little keyboard icon is lit up here. Basically that means that the controls and the LCD screen are mapped to this instance of Komplete Kontrol. Anything in here appears on the keyboard. Now on the keyboard we can press the Shift key, hold that down, and then press the Instance button. And what that will do is that will toggle the keyboard between the Native Instruments mode, the Komplete Kontrol mode, and MIDI mode. So when I go across, bear with me for 1 second. So I've just pressed Shift and Instance, and what has happened is it's disconnected me in this track from the Komplete Kontrol software, and now on my controller I've actually got CC 14, 15, 16, 17 displayed on my keyboard, which is basically what is displayed as my my template here. Now this is the default template that will be loaded. You can create as many templates as you want, cycle through them and select them and what have you. But basically the default template gives you 2 pages to cycle between. So you can go from page 1 to page 2, which gives you 16 MIDI controls. You can create as many pages as you like and have, 100 MIDI controls that you can map to things. What we want to do though is we don't want to map things. We want things to be automatic. That's what improves our workflow. So what we basically want to do is close all these down. What we want to do is create another control surface for the Komplete Kontrol keyboard. Now the way that we're going to do that is, first of all, in your user folder for Ableton Live, let me just find it over here. So in your user folder for Ableton Live, if we just click back here, so basically you go onto your computer wherever it's installed it. So it'll be, I'm using Windows. Mac users will have to find the appropriate location themselves. But in my user folder, I go to my name, or my pseudo name. Then we go into app data, roaming, Ableton, and inside there, depending on how many different versions you've had installed, I use the beta version of Live, so there's constantly new versions. You want to open up the version that applies to what you're using at the moment. So that would be one of the latest versions probably. Inside there's a preference folder, and then inside there you've got what's called the user remote scripts. Now inside this folder, unless you've created user remote scripts before, you will probably be aware of how to create these, but if you haven't, all you'll find in there is these 2 files here. Now this gives you a little bit of a how-to, create a folder and yada yada yada. So there's a very basic sort of instructions there. But essentially what you want to do to create what we're going to do is create a control template for the Komplete Kontrol keyboard that will allow us to use the MIDI mode feature to control live devices, effects, and third-party instruments and stuff that aren't part of the Komplete Kontrol NKS family. And to do that, what we do is create a folder name for this. I've just called mine Komplete Kontrol Macro. And then we copy this file and simply place it in that folder. Then once we've done that, we then double click this to load up that folder. To load up that file. Now inside this file, it has already been pre-configured with all the controls that you'll need for intelligent mapping. All we have to do is basically follow the bouncing ball. So going down here, starting here, this is where you basically want to start. The input and the output name of the controller. Now this will be the controller that Live will look for to select it as the control surface. Now where do we get this name? You'll see that mine's called Komplete Kontrol -1. Your system, it may be called something a little bit different, but the easiest way to get the name of this controller, this is the name of your Komplete Kontrol keyboard, is in Live, go to Options, Preferences, and then in the MIDI input and output ports, let me just select none, you'll see here that my Komplete Kontrol -1, that's the one that we want. This is the MIDI input. Now remember, there are several Komplete Kontrol elements. One is for the DAW control, one is for the external input, and one is for the Komplete Kontrol MIDI keyboard part itself. And that's the one we want. And it's labeled Komplete Kontrol -1 with spaces. So we fill that in exactly as it appears in Live. And this will be the control surface that Live will now use for this remote script. So we continue down. Now this controller doesn't have pad controllers, pad triggers, so we just skip past this. What we're interested in first of all is device controls. Now this will be what controls are we going to use on the keyboard to control the blue hand functions. So there's 8 controls that we can use, 8 encoders. All you need to do is put in the CC number. Now I've used 14 through to 21. The reason that I've done that is because the default template starts at CC14 and goes through to CC21. This is on page 1. So I've labeled those 14 through to 21. Now I can actually select the specific channel. So this is very useful if I've got chained controllers and things like that. It doesn't matter in this case. We just select, leave it as -1, which uses the global channel and that was set up here. The global channel is basically any channel. Doesn't really matter in this type of situation. And then scrolling further down, we've got how does the control actually behave when we twist it? What type of control is it? Just leave it as absolute. That is perfectly fine. Now what this will do, we won't worry about this at the moment. If we were to go File, Save this here, and basically reload live, what we'll find now in the options, go down to Preferences, and then one of the spare control surface slots, if you've got a spare one. Mine are normally maxed out, but for this example, I'm showing basically a couple of free slots here. Scroll down through the list, and here we go. Here's the Complete Control Macro option that I've got listed here, and that is conveniently the name that we labeled that folder. So that folder name is what will appear in the list. And then for the input and the output, we just select the MIDI entry for the Complete Control keyboard, both for the input and for the output. And that's basically all we have to do there. Now for this instance here that we've got selected here, if I want to control this instance, well, let's go back to a Complete Control track here as a start. So first of all, if this little keyboard icon is illuminated, if I go and grab encoder number 1 for instance, you can see that that is controlling the color of that instrument. Now in here, if I would like to control this little macro section here instead, what I need to do is actually, sorry about the phone, someone will get that. What I need to do is actually disconnect Complete Control from the software here. So to do that, I can actually just click this little icon. No, I can't do that. To do that from the keyboard, press and hold the Shift key followed by the instance key. And what you should notice is your keyboard will actually switch to a MIDI controller, and it will actually display on the screen what you have labeled in your software here. So at the moment my keyboard is displaying CC 14, 15, 16, yada yada yada. Now when I move encoder number 1, it moves macro number 1 here, just like magic. Now for those that have set up control scripts before, this is all pretty stock standard stuff. For those that haven't, this is really useful and very powerful, because the macro control does not just apply to these 8 macros. It can apply to anything in the chain. All you have to do is move the blue hand by selecting another device. So let's say I come over to my device over here, and you can see that moving some of my controls actually move the controls of this device here. So I can start adding automation to this right now just by basically hitting record and now moving some controls. Now one of the other really neat things about the Complete Control keyboard is the position of all of these controls is actually displayed on the keyboard controller. So as I flick from here and select this here, unfortunately I don't have a webcam to show you, but take my word for it. As I switch here, all of these controls here will update the display on the keyboard, which is quite handy. The downside is that the names do not display on the keyboard, only the name that we've assigned here. So what I would recommend for this is I would actually rename. I would rename my controls Macro 1, Macro 2, just as a bit of a reminder. Now what I'm going to do is actually load up a template that I've created as a basic sort of thing for live. So if I go back, you'll see that Macro 1, Macro 2, labeled all of those. Now it is actually possible, so let's go, here's my next example. If I go into my Omnisphere track and just open up the controls here, you can see that I've got, you know, probably about 100 controls that I can access. Now if I select the blue hand control onto here and move encoder number 1, there's my cutoff. If I move control number 8, there's my amp release. So that's nice, but what about if I'd like to control all of these other controls? The way that the blue hand feature normally works with most controllers is you get 8 macro controls, that's it. You can't normally get more. It is possible though, using the configuration here. Scroll down and you will find that we have these bank buttons. Now it'd be nice to be able to just use bank next, bank previous, but I've tried using these with the encoders with the Komplete Kontrol keyboard, and you just have to turn them very finely, and it goes up through all 8 banks within, you know, probably a 16th to a 20th of a turn. So it's not very user friendly. What you can do, and what works really well, is to actually, instead of having a next and previous bank button, to actually use the encoders to go to the specific bank. So you've got 8 banks of controls, which basically allow you to access up to 64 controls. Basically what you can do is set up each control. So you can see here bank 1 is controller number 22, 23, 24, so forth and so on. If I come to my page number 2, I've actually labeled this as macro banks. Bank 1, bank 2, bank 3. Now if I select bank 1 for instance, you can see that the channel number is 22. Then we go 23, 24, 25, 26. Now this corresponds to banks 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, yada yada. What I can do is if I want to go to bank 4, all I do is touch this controller and give it a tiny little twist, and now bank 4 is selected. The extra benefit to this is underneath the LCD display that shows the encoder position, basically whichever bank is selected, the encoder position shows maximum 127 and all other encoders are at 0. So instantly if I switch to this page, I'll see that this bank is lit up under here and I know that I'm in bank 4. So to look at this in practice, if I have a look here, so I'm in bank 1 at the moment. So bank 1, I shift encoder number 1. Okay, so bank 1, I shift encoder number 1 and my cutoff moves here. Now if I switch my keyboard to page 2, so if I pop this up over here, you'll see that when I switch to page 2, it goes to page 2. So if I switch to page 2 now on my controller, I'm in the live macro banks. Now all I'm going to do is grab controller number 2, encoder number 2. And hey presto, that's now switched to bank 2. I can see that on the keyboard and you probably saw it flash up down the screen here. Going back to page 1, if I move encoder number 1 now, hey presto, look at that. This one here moves. And similarly again, I would expect this one here to be bank number 3. Beautiful, look at that. So instantly we've got access to a lot more controls than we ever did have before. And not to forget too that if I want to flick back to complete control mode, hold down shift, press instance, and hey presto, I'm back to controlling the VST itself. So this probably is all I really need to show in terms of that. It's definitely worth, oh no, there was one more thing, sorry. Further to this, we've got volume sliders. Now, of course, you can use encoders as sliders, but you'll see in the template that I've created, if I go to page number 3, I've got labeled that as live volume. And you'll see that I haven't bothered to label this yet. CC 30, 31, 32 applies to volume slider 30, 31, 32. So if I actually go to my keyboard, I'm on page number 3, and I can actually see the volume level of all 3 controllers on my keyboard. But if I grab one of the encoders and start moving it, look at that, I've got volume control direct from the keyboard, and I've also got feedback of the volume level on the controller as well. Now you can only control the first 8 volume levels or tracks. I don't know if the bank buttons actually apply to volume. Let me just check. No, they don't. So you can only control the first 8 track volumes, but still, this is more than you could do if this wasn't set up. Now, of course, the downside to setting all of this up is that you need to occupy 2 control surface slots just to use all these features of the control keyboard. But in the event that you need this functionality, there is nothing wrong with just simply activating a control surface temporarily and then switching back to another one for a different template. Hopefully Ableton managed to increase the number of slots that we can use, or Native Instruments can somehow bundle what I've done into a single script file. Would make it so good. Now, just lastly to this, further on from this, we can actually have multiple pages after that. So I've got live control on my first 3 pages, and then after that I've just got, let's say, MIDI control. I haven't configured all of this, so they're all the same controls, but I can have MIDI CC numbers on subsequent pages that I could hard set to features. I might use this to control the the sends or the receives or particular effects and things like that. It gives you the best of all worlds. So from the Komplete Kontrol keyboard, with this setup, we've got complete control, then we've got live macro control, and then we've got standard straightforward MIDI control. So hopefully this shows a little bit more of what is possible, gives you some extra ideas on how to use the hardware, and by all means, if you want to send me a shout out, you can register on my Facebook page, freelancesoundlabs.com. I don't really care about Facebook that much, but of course you can also visit my website, and if you want to support me, then please purchase the NKS packs, or give me some ideas for new NKS packs that I could create that are not NKS compatible. And look, we'll catch you around. Cheers.